Welcome back, everyone. Today I've got the latest evolution and something that we've covered a couple of times before. That is the Byte 4 by Azulle. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the Byte is Azulle's larger, mid-tier fanless system. They have a couple of different levels of system. They have the access devices, which are kind of stick-like, and we'll grab one of those in a second here. They have the bytes, which are these. These are built on a similar platform to the access systems, but they're a bit upscaled. You get more ports. Looks like this one comes with a Gemini Lake Atom CPU, which is what's going to be in the contemporary access 4s. 4 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of storage. That's a step up from the 32 gig baseline that we used to get. And I can see on the package there's a couple more ports on this, which I'm excited to see. So this is the Byte 4. We've looked at the Byte 3 previously, and the Byte Plus, which could have been called Byte 2. And there'll be links to both of those articles in the description below. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get into the Byte 4. All right, so this one was sent to us by Azulle, but I did get a chance to look at one previously. And this is retail packaging. This would have just come off the shelf from their inventory. So we get the card for the Byte 4 talking about what's in the box, power adapter, 12 volt 2 amp, which that's actually a sticker. What did the old manual say? The old manual said 5 volt 3 amp, which is probably what comes with the access. Interesting. They didn't make that mistake anywhere else, did they? Specifications. Power input, 12 volt 2 amp. Power output, 5 volt 1.5 amp through the Type-C port. So that's 15 watts out the Type-C. We're going to test that. 802.11 AC, dual band, dual gigabit LAN, PoE optional. So we get that. We get the, are you happy if you're unhappy? Here's our support number card. This little box that contains a couple of screws and a thermal pad. Our 12 volt 2 amp adapter, which, spoilers here, we have permission to plug in a bigger adapter because I have some suspicions that it can actually handle more capacity going through that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the unit itself, this is a Byte 4. Yep, input 12 volt 2 amp. On the back here, we've got our 12 volt DC jack, PoE, and LAN. These are 2 gigabit Ethernet ports. Now, by default, it's PoE capable, but not PoE equipped. In the future, we're actually going to do a video and upgrade this Byte 4 basically as far as I can take it. And what that means we'll get to in a minute here. But one of the items that we will be installing is the PoE module. So there'll be a section in that video dedicated to that. So we've got Displayport out, HDMI out, VGA. On this side, we have 4 super speed USB 3 ports, a USB Type-C port, a micro SD card slot. The only things on the front are the power button and an IR jack, which it doesn't appear to have come with the remote. I'm told that the remotes from the previous models are still compatible with it. And then we've got some fan vents on this side. There's a little warning label on here that says it uses an Intel processor featuring Intel Burst technology, which is a weird way of phrasing but it said the speed and power consumption of the device will vary depending on its use. EIST, Intel Enhanced Speed Step, has been around since Pentium 3, I think, maybe the Pentium 2. And then Turbo Boost has been around since at least the early Core 2, or the late Core 2 chips, I should say, could boost up 1 bin, and then later chips started to introduce increased turbo profiles. So somebody must have asked them a question, why is my chip running at 1 gigahertz instead of 2 when I'm sitting at the desktop doing nothing, for them to have to include this sticker. Long story short, the CPU is going to have turbo bins. Once I know what model CPU is in here specifically, we will discuss what those turbo bins actually translate to, because they're different on different chips. And the manual here is unfortunately relatively vague and just saying Gemini Lake R, N, and J series, Apollo Lake J and N series, which we know this is a Gemini Lake equipped device. Cool stuff though, out of the box, this comes with Windows 10 Pro. So what does that mean? Well, that means I get access to Hyper-V and all the Windows 10 Pro features. And on a device that retails for, I want to say, $269, the Windows license itself is more than half the device value right there. And depending on what you want to do with it, that's actually very tempting. So let's get in here. And this unit has the little rubber feet screw in. I'm not a huge fan of this design, because there's no good way to grab these if they get stuck or twisted too tight somehow. That's relatively solvable. I've seen similar screws that just kind of have a Phillips embedded in them, almost like it's stamped into them out of the rubber or hard plastic. So that would definitely be one thing I would like to see adjusted. Oh, you know what? I almost completely missed it because of where it's located. There's a combo headphone microphone jack here. I would have preferred that been a separate pair of jacks. I understand why it's not, but I do like separate jacks better, especially on desktops. That said, with everyone using headsets these days, that can go either way as to which one makes the most sense. All right, and with that out, just a little pressure with my thumb here, and out goes the memory or the plate. Well, now this is interesting. This particular unit has crucial memory in it. I think the other retail unit I had some ADATA RAM. It was still DDR4 2666, but it was, just a different vendor's RAM. There's no real issue there, multi-sourcing memory. So inside here we get a couple of interesting things. We've got this, which is a SATA power and data connector. So we have that, and if you look, this came with 4 screws. There are 4 screw holes in the bottom here. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to put a SATA SSD in this and play around with that. We have this M.2 slot, which is for an NVMe drive, I believe. And yeah, so this is an NVMe. Now, this is only an M2x2. It's been a long time since we actually saw an M2x2 SSD. So you're not going to find one that's actually designed for that typically. But some of the drives that we say, hey, this doesn't quite hit the interface limits, or have, various performance issues due to things like host memory buffer, or they use QLC memory, aren't going to be as big of an issue if you're only on a 2x2 interface instead of M2x2. I think it's 3.0x2, but they're not going to be as held back as, say, a top-of-the-line flagship 4-lane SSD that's built for PCIe Gen 4, capable of 6 gigs a second. That you're just wasting money buying a drive like that for a unit like this. But I'm happy to see that this is NVMe. The Byte 3 was SATA only. And it looks like we've got a big metal plate on the top, and then I'm told this shell is a composite material to help dissipate heat. So the CPU is actually on the opposite side of the board here, probably directly here where there's 4 screws. We'll definitely do some thermal testing. I may, since this is not a unit that I can't modify, I may even drill a tiny hole in here and run one of my thermal probes inside the case, or maybe try and fish it through one of the gaps in the chassis to measure the temperatures from the inside as well when we do testing. Here's our wireless chip, and that appears to be an Intel 7265. That is an older chip at this point. It's only an 802.11ac, but that is a very good chip. I had a 7265 chip in my ThinkPad Yoga and my T450S. Really good chip there. This is some of the circuitry required for PoE power. However, we can see that some of it's missing, and that's this here that we'll get to in its own segment of the upgrade video. It looks like there's 4 jumpers here and 4 jumpers there that'll be involved with installing that PoE module. We have some M2 SSDs that we'll put in. I'm going to be putting more memory in here. Now, I mentioned the fact that this comes with 10 Pro is fantastic because you could theoretically use these units for virtualization duties. You could use them as a home firewall. In fact, today at home on Windows Server, not Windows Pro, I run OpenSense on a server inside Hyper-V as a virtual machine. And that uses a fair bit more power than just a normal firewall should. Now, I use that server for other things. It does Plex. It runs some game servers for things like Minecraft, and a couple of different versions of that with various mods. But if I wanted to set up something basic, I could buy one of these, and it takes PoE in, so I could power it off my switch. So I've got that MikroTik CRS328 we've talked about before. If you're curious about what those numbers mean, there's a link in the description below. Needless to say, it's a very affordable small business grade switch with PoE support. But anyway, so, I could run this off PoE and then not need a big server like that unless I needed the game servers up, and keep my infrastructure power, down to a minimum noise level, and capacity-wise, you could put 16 terabytes of storage in this thing without an issue. Now, I wouldn't tell you that this is the ideal system for that, because nothing against Azulle, but a $250 box to hold a $1,200 SSD is a little silly, but it's not the strangest thing I've seen anyone do either. So you get a lot of flexibility in here and no noise. I mean, there's no fan, there's no moving parts. We've got PoE power. I'm going to try pushing a little more power through it, and the reason that I mentioned that is the USB ports on this are capable of delivering more power out than that 2 amp brick is capable of delivering. So we've got some pretty high power USB Type-C devices that are capable of pulling 10 watts of power on their own. And then I've got some other standard USB devices that will pull 5 watts on their own. So if you were using this as a small server or something like that, it would not be impossible to hook up, little bit of fuzz got in there, a USB-C SSD that pulls 5 watts, and then like some USB attached 2.5-inch hard drives or other high performance SSDs. I've got that Kingston HyperX USB-C SSD that pulls a fair amount of power as well. And so you could potentially try to pull more juice through this than it demands. And that's nothing to say of, M2 SSDs, they don't use no power, but they do use some power. You could get 2.5, 5 watts out of an SSD. Same thing for a SATA drive. So if I attach a big 10 watt USB-C device to this and I upgrade it internally as far as it'll go, I might run into a limit with that 2 amp brick. So we're going to attach it to, I've got a 4 amp adapter in our testing. Last thing I want to do, since this is just an unboxing, is I want to put it next to my poor battered Byte 3 and just run through some of the changes side by side and talk about a couple that I like and a couple that I don't. So this is my Byte 3 and this is our Byte 4, and I put that on, that goes in that way. I'll screw it in later. So out of the gate, external material construction feels similar. The Byte 4 appears just a couple millimeters shorter than the 3, and that's not going to demonstrate it very well. Oh, you know what? Let's get the one that I didn't hot glue to the back of a TV. So here's my Byte 3, here's my Byte 4. The Byte 4 is ever so slightly shorter. Okay. It is slightly deeper. And potentially could have been made a little more compact, but they didn't do a bad job on that part. There is a little bit of wasted space here that potentially it could have been slightly narrower, and that basically accommodates for the entire difference there. And this is where we get to things that I say that I do like and I don't like. I love the addition of Displayport. Displayport's fantastic. I'm not a huge fan of removing all USB from the back. Having it all on the right side here is a little bit cramped and crowded. And it looks like the USB ports on the Byte 3 are just spaced out a little bit better, especially the ones on the side here. There are USB devices that we have that I can plug in that would block the other ports. So that's a potential downside of grouping your ports up like this. That's not something that we don't see on, desktop motherboards anyway. But I would have liked them to have maybe just put them all flat in a row. I don't know what that would have done to the board layout costs, however. Not a huge fan of the move to micro SD. I understand that it's the more popular one at this point, but it's really easy to go from SD to micro SD. In fact, to do it, all you need is one of these little passive adapters that you can insert a micro SD card in, and you're done. That's it. I've made a micro SD and SD. So it's not like that is a difficult thing to do. There's no real performance loss doing it that way. So I understand why they did it. I don't necessarily like it. Let's see. Going back to the front, I like that the power button's bigger and easier to see. Probably could have dropped the IR port if they weren't going to ship a remote with it, though. And finally, let's go to the back and talk just for another second. I like that the DC jack is no longer in with the rest of the ports. It's not in between anything. That helps keep it out of the way. It is a little tight to that PoE port, but there's only so much space left on the back panel here without stacking some of this vertically. Although they could have stacked the Displayport and the HDMI and had plenty of room. That said, I understand why they didn't. Displayport cables tend to be kind of big and can be in the way. So I think they did their best there. The move to dual band wireless is going to be huge. These already had decent Wi-Fi in them, but it was fairly I'm not going to say slow, but slower than a lot of the laptops that we had, because this had the Intel 3000 series single radio Wi-Fi, where this is dual radio. So that's going to be a big improvement there. Even if it is only the 7265, that's still a huge step forward. So yeah, that's it. We will rerun the Byte 3 through some of our benchmarks. Now, the Byte 3, I can't upgrade the RAM on. I can upgrade the storage, and I think I had a SATA SSD in this one at one point. But that's it. And the Byte 3 had no NVMe capability. So, already, just on paper, the Byte 4 is a much more capable device without necessarily sacrificing a whole ton compared to the Byte 3. It's a little wider, it's a little deeper, the board layout shows that, and some of that is just due to some of the added components. Alright, that's all we had for today. I do want to thank Azulle for sending this Byte 4 in. We love working with them, so I always like to get my hands on these mini PCs. I use them all over the place at work. Not as much the Bytes, although as you can see, I've got a couple in my studio. What we really use a ton of are these Access style systems. And these, if you're wondering, why would I want to use this, at least from my point of view, are great for digital signage. I plug it into a TV, I have a copy of Windows, I can tell it to do whatever I want, whenever I want, and off it goes. Unfortunately, we did not get our hands on an Access 4. We may get a chance to look at one of those in the future. This is an Access 3 in my hand here. So, I want to thank anyone who helps support Pocketables, either via our Amazon affiliate links or via Patreon. It is support like that makes content like this possible. I mentioned that I'm going to plug a 4 amp power supply into this, and I had to buy one of those. So that's the kind of thing that your support, one way or the other, helps, and part of how you help make these videos possible. I want to thank Alextrix for providing our opening and closing themes. As always, definitely check out his channel. And finally, thank you for watching.